That being said, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm going to just go over just a few recommendations and then introduce myself as well. So that being said, if you have questions, please put them in the questions. It's really important because I want to make sure any of you that are attending today get your questions answered. Even if you're not sure if we're going to cover them, put the questions in anyway. Send them in ahead of time, give us direction, because there's a lot of different areas that we can cover. So just bear with me for a moment here. Putting all this over here so I have your questions. And then that being said as well, so today we're going to cover, there was a lot that came out of the last webinar that I did, was kind of like an overview on the initial stages of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There's a lot of questions on that, continue to get a lot of questions on that as this is becoming more widely known about this new legislation. So some of the planning things that we're going to talk about, be it today or on the next webinar, is going to be around strategies that you can, oh, and here's Katie, perfect. Strategies that you can consider, not only with this new bill, I'll introduce you in just a sec, Katie, not only with this new bill, but also in other aspects. So what we're going to do in today's webinar is we usually do once or twice a year, we have Katie, who, for those of you who don't know Katie, she is our certified financial planner and planning expert, and a lot of these strategies and ideas that are coming up that we're using for our clients in their planning Katie is running that show. And so we wanted to have her talk a little bit about this today, not just hear Kristina. Again, you got the overview from me last time around. So Katie Lindfelt is our certified financial planner at Sequoia Wealth Advisors. And she has been working very actively with our clients to see what, if anything, in this bill may impact their financial plan, and what, if any, changes or adjustments we should make in light of this. So Katie's going to talk a bit today. I'm going to go off camera. And so please send in your questions. Like I said, I'm watching for them here. Send in your questions. And then after Katie's done, she'll see if there's any questions and we'll get them all answered. And then after that, I'll hop in whatever time's remaining and talk a little bit about the economic updates, because as you can imagine, there's a lot happening. So that being said, 3 quick things to share before we start today. Number 1, in a world where everything is political, the intention today is really to go over this bill, what's in it, and considerations, not to get into is a good or bad bill and all the rest of that. Certainly, if you have questions that do have a political component, ask them. We're happy to answer them. However, I just wanted to touch upon, as we did in the last administration with the Secure Act and the CHIPS Act, we're here not to get into the right or wrong. We're here to get into here's what the rules are and how you may plan around them. Number 2, this is not fully fleshed out yet. The Treasury Department, the IRS, is still ruling on a lot of the specifics. So things we share with you today may be modified further, and there may be some changes or adjustments. And I'll give you an example of one that the IRS just ruled on, was the phase out of the credit for purchasing electric vehicles. Well, the IRS came in and said, you don't actually have to have it before it cuts off at the end of September. You just have to have a contract in place. So previously, it would appear that you had to have the vehicle in your possession. So some things are still going to get fleshed out over time. Final one, our regulators require that I say is nothing we're saying today should be construed as advice or guidance to your specific situation. Each individual situation is unique, and a decision in one area can have big impacts in other areas of your plan, not only in the tax year, but also long-term planning. So definitely, again, if your clients of Sequoia, we're already working on this in your plan, and we'll update you and make our recommendations. If you're not, please reach out to us and we can provide individualized guidance and strategy. So with that being said, I'm going to hop off camera. I'm here listening in the background, and get your questions ready. Take it away, Katie.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristina. And yeah, please do send in questions as I go through some of this. I am only going to handle a few points that I think are really worth a consideration for individuals, and particularly have a planning component. By planning, we mean something you can change or do because of it within your own particular life. So as a financial planner, what do? I'm looking to provide my clients with financial empowerment. Whatever is unknown, that's often really scary. What we're looking is to dig into that together so we can set a plan forward. So let's look at a few things here, see how they might fit for you. We're going to talk about just a little bit about this because One of the biggest things about this new bill, it's got the word big in it, and it is huge. It's got a lot of little changes and a few really big ones. I want to look at a few that are particularly interesting. One of them will be taxation of Social Security. I'm going to take a look real quick at some changes to the alternative minimum tax, or AMT. Changes that affect us here in California in particular would be modifications to the state and local tax deductions, or SALT deductions, and some interesting components for charitable giving. If you've heard me talk before, I love talking about charitable giving, something important to me. And I think we should really look at, when there is law that can facilitate that, it's always worth taking consideration there. So I will go through a few of these here. And like I said, please throw in questions if there's clarifications or other pieces there. So taxation of Social Security. This is something I bring up frequently. People are often surprised that Social Security income is taxable. And that is not something that changed in this law. It changed in that in effect, it ends up not really being taxable for folks, but it didn't actually change the underlying rules. Social Security is still taxable. What has changed is that there is a new tax deduction for seniors, which comes out to $6,000 a person, so $12,000 for a couple. This, though, is what is getting explained as making Social Security not taxable. The math behind it really works out, where for many people it then wouldn't be taxable. It's got two big caveats. One, this is temporary. It's only through 2028. So this additional 6 to 12,000, single versus married, expires. What it means is that it's a deduction, right? So you have how much taxes you owe, and you can subtract it along the way. It is, right, it expires in 2028, and it has phase outs. And that's the planning component, right? So this is only good for a few years. And if you make more than 75,000 a piece, so 75 single, 150 joint, it phases out. So what does this mean? Well, those who have higher earners may consider where we want to take our distributions to take advantage of this additional deduction for these few years and then swap things in the future. Who does this come into impact with? Well, it's when you have choice on where you're pulling money. If you have income that's both IRA, which is pre-tax, and Roth, which is after tax, there may be a more of a fine tuning of which bucket to pull from. It's also a consideration for Roth conversions. I love Roth conversions. That's when we take money that has not yet been taxed. We do a special way of moving it into this after-tax bucket, but rather than it being after tax and has little bits of tax every year, it's Roth, meaning so long as it stays in this wrapper, there's no taxes on distributions ever. Both are fantastic, right? With the Roth, you've already paid taxes. With the IRA, it's growing with the taxes kicked down the line. What's beneficial here is we pick your lowest tax years possible. Ideally, right? If you could choose to pay your taxes in any particular years, it's whenever it'd be the lowest for you. What that means is some of the math on is the next few years your lowest years changes for some folks. If it pushes you up over this 150 joint number, it may not make sense. So that's a planning consideration there. Should we do Roth conversions or not? Which buckets should we pull from to kind of keep within that realm? If it matters for you, if you're well above 150 taxable income, then it doesn't matter, right? We're not going to pull those levers, and enough likely to save you that tax deduction. So it makes it where mathematically Social Security is not taxable for seniors, but it's not actually repealed. The math behind it, and you would still see it if you're doing some tax calculations, what portions of the Social Security get taxed. Messy little bit to start with. The next one I'm going to look at is the AMT, or Alternative Minimum Tax. AMT, if you remember, is like a separate way of calculating your taxes. It says that if you have these categories that kicks you over here, let's redo the math on your taxes, taking off any itemized deductions, and make sure you shouldn't owe more. One of the problems with AMT is, it came into play, right? They're saying, well, with all these itemized deductions, these high earners weren't paying enough in taxes. That wasn't good. So AMT came into play, but it was never put in with automatic increases in who it hit. And therefore it kept over time where lower and lower, truly more and more middle class workers were getting put into there and having to pay these taxes. So AMT is one of the things that actually went down. So for 2025, the phase outs start at 626,000 and change if you're single, and double that, so over 1.2 million if you're married. That's where the phase outs come into play. Well, that has been reduced in this new bill. It is now at 500,000 single, 1 million married. And so more people are going to have to be pulled into AMT. AMT is not like some huge extra tax, but it means that any itemized deductions you had no longer come into play. So if you were doing a lot of charitable giving, or those SALT taxes, the state and local taxes, so on and so forth, goes out the window. So that's just a consideration there for folks. If you're making around that 500,000 line single, that 1 million married filed jointly, it may hit you. But so that's just your income. If you don't have a lot of choice, you have a lot of choice. Who has choice, though, are folks with stock options. So what we see most often in planning here are incentive stock options, where someone is given a contract where they have the right to purchase stock at a particular price. And one of the things with those stock options is they are a triggering event for AMT. What does that mean? In planning wise, 2025 is worth considering. Should you exercise those options this year rather than next year? It's going to be at a lower number that you might hit some of this AMT numbers next year rather than this year. So if you have a choice between the two, it's worth the consideration. I never recommend making decisions purely based on taxes, especially when there's also an investment component, which is what a stock option is, right? It's you choosing to buy in as an owner in a company. And so there's a lot of other considerations there as well within your life and the investment side. But if you were highly considering exercising or buying in, it's worth looking at running some math. Should you do it this year compared to next year? Because it could have you owing more in taxes if you do it in 2026 instead. All right. Next one, state and local taxes. We call these SALT. They have been in the news a lot. They very much are an implication for people who live in areas with higher taxes, both state taxes as well as local taxes, which would be property taxes. So the taxes you pay that are not to the US government, which are the state and local taxes, are potentially an itemized deduction. One of the big changes in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was that it was reduced to only $10,000. In a state with high property taxes, like California, just because of the cost of property, right? It's a percentage of property that could be a pretty small number relative to the total amount of tax someone is paying. And there's a lot of pressure within the writing of this bill to raise that limit. Maybe potentially have no cap on it. And there's a lot that was floated around. What is in the ruling and in this bill here is that it has been raised pretty significantly. It's now capped at 20,000 for single, 40,000 married filing jointly. It still fits within the total itemized deduction calculations. But there's two big pieces here. You know, it's got a sunset that happens, so it's not forever that it's been raised. And these raised amounts have a cap. When the cap has to do, so meaning if you earn over a certain amount, it reduces how much you can deduct all the way back down to that $10,000 floor. And so it is only at $500,000 that it starts to reduce, and it's a very narrow phase out. It's only 500,000 of income to 600,000 of income. At 600,000 of income, you're back down to the original 10,000 floor. And it reverts back in 2030 to the old rules of 10,000. So folks who are in that under 600,000 income level could see a higher deduction, meaning they're more likely to take an itemized deduction then. And so there could be some consideration there for planning. What if you might have a larger deduction and maybe taking this larger deduction for the next 5 years, what else could you do to also get those deductions? This could mean, if you have charitable giving you want to do, it may make sense to do it over the next 5 years if you also have this higher SALT deduction. So you get a way bigger itemized deduction for these next 5 years. There's some interesting considerations there. In the tax world, they call this bunching. Can we make some choices and do a bunch of things at the same time? A way to do the charitable contributions in bunchings is something Kristina and I really enjoy, which are donor advised funds. It's a way where you can gift in a large amount in 1 year for the tax reasons, but you don't have to actually do all the gifting out to the charities in all those years. And they could spread out over more years. You don't get deductions in the future, but you can achieve two things, right? The tax deduction, but also a gifting strategy that actually makes sense for your life and the charities you care about. Which charitable giving is where I've got a bit more to cover. There is once again, we're going to go back again to seniors. Seniors get an extra $6,000 deduction, right? Per person, 12,000 joint. It has one big implication that many more seniors will not itemize on their taxes. Their standard deduction is going to be so big, you don't need to. It makes it a lot easier to file your taxes. And really, I don't care if you itemize or not. I just want you to pay how little taxes you legally can, right? So what does that mean? That means that choices you would make for itemized deductions are not applicable. So having a mortgage and the mortgage interest won't benefit you from a tax perspective if you're not itemizing. And same thing with charitable gifts. If you're not itemizing, then large charitable gifts will not benefit you from a tax perspective because you still won't be itemizing. It makes the threshold of how much you'd have to gift even larger before it would have a tax benefit. So once again, we go back to the bunching component. But on the other side, and it might be partially to benefit charities because they might be hindered by this reduction in itemizing. Um, they have brought back something that used to exist. So those who do not itemize can deduct $1,000 per person, so 1,000 single, 2,000 married, for charitable deduction, for charitable gifting. It has to be to a qualified public charity, so it can't go to a donor advised fund or private foundation. But you can still take 1,000 a person as a deduction, even if you're not itemizing. So that's a really cool one. I'm excited to see that going back in there. It's nice, easy deduction, and I love it when there's little ways like that that the taxes can help charitable giving and help taxpayers to really do the things they want to do. So what are some strategies here and things worth considering? I mentioned donor advised funds, that they can be a way to bunch charitable donations, if that makes sense, because you are going to be itemizing. And then the other one is qualified charitable distributions. They are where you can direct a gift from your IRA. You have to be at least 70 and a half. I know it's an old number in the IRA world that doesn't matter as much anymore. 70 and a half. And you can send up to 105,000 as of this year directly from your IRA to a charity. This is really useful if the funds you have available to gift is your IRA. It's also useful if you're in required minimum distribution age and those distributions are pushing up your taxable income. Instead of writing a check from your checkbook to the charity, if it comes directly from your IRA, it's not an itemized deduction of any sort, but you also don't have to pay taxes on the money coming out. It's a really cool way to gift as well as reduce some of your tax impact. In some ways, it's even better than if it was an itemized because it's fully non-taxable. So there's really some strategies there based on what you want to achieve, both in your life and those you care for, as well as from a tax perspective. So, there are some tax reliefs built into this bill for those on Social Security, and we've got these higher SALT caps, but there's some challenges. People who face AMT could be coming in at even lower incomes than previous years. And so there really are some things in 2026 that it makes sense to do some planning for, but even this year a little bit with some of the changes on taxes and some deduction pieces, particularly for seniors, which is often not the case. A little different there. I think I blew through all of that. So if anyone has questions, please put them in our Q&A. We would quite happily answer any and bring in there. And Kristina might have a few to get things going.
Well, we'll have some, we have some that are come in, and we also have some from people. We usually on these things get a lot of people registering, but not as many attending live in the post-pandemic forced to stay at home world. So some questions have come in advance, and I'm going to take out the ones you answered because you did answering some of the questions here. And I think with some of these questions, what I'm going to do is have Katie answer first, and I'll add to it if appropriate, because some of them sort of cross an area where you may want to get a little bit broader.
Yeah, I only covered things that were pretty cleanly planning, but there's a lot more that covers both sides.
And the one thing I want to start before we get into this is that nothing is in isolation of anything else. So these ideas that Katie threw out there, we've been applying them to our clients, and it's been pretty significant, the impacts as in their plan. But we also have to look at things like the taxation on the portfolio level, right? Because all sources of income. So sometimes people don't see in the non-retirement accounts, trading activity within those accounts, capital gains issues, dividend issue, income issue, is it taxable or non-taxable? And even that is in layers, because something that's non-taxable on tax level could impact your cost of Medicare, right? So I cannot express enough.
I know that wasn't part of this bill, but yeah, it all ties together.
It's incredibly complicated. Things are so intertwined, and a small thing over here can make a big difference over here. And that becomes a challenge, especially when people have their portfolios held at companies that do what I call mass trading. So I'm not going to throw any company under the bus here, but think of some of these very large investment companies that kind of put everybody in the same basket. You know, everyone conservative goes in this portfolio, everyone, they're trading that portfolio for their objectives, but they're not trading it based on your tax situation. So that activity means you get this 1099, and that trading activity, because it's not individualized to you, could create headaches elsewhere. It could create a higher cost of Medicare. It could create other tax headaches. Or as Katie mentioned, you could hit these thresholds, you know, AMT related or other planning related, that all of a sudden some of these things don't become available to you or become less available. So I can't stress enough, Katie and I shout this from the rooftops all the time, is holistic planning, looking at everything is critical. At Sequoia, we do tax planning. We do not file your taxes. We are not CPAs or tax preparers, but we'll do tax planning. We run a beautiful report. You can take it to your CPAs. Our client CPAs love it. Makes their jobs easier. It's strategy. Do this, 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 and this, and this, and potentially reduce your taxes in the future. So planning, as Katie mentioned, where this is a good time now, we're running into towards year end, really consider planning and looking at your entire picture and saying, what, if anything, I or we in a family should do differently to optimize our planning. So we'll come into the questions in no particular order. Oh, I know this one's in Katie's wheelhouse, so I'm going to answer you. Do you plan for young people so they make good choices?
Absolutely. That's actually a really fun place because, as you can imagine, the longer the runway, the fewer the big changes that have to be made to get somewhere great. So yeah, we do a lot of planning for young folks, helping people as they figure out some of the first decisions in life and how these big financial decisions impact them, both on the investment and personal side, and once again, on the tax side.
And I'll add, it's a service we provide to our clients' families because it gives you the confidence they'll be successful, and in some cases they'll be inheriting your money in the future. So it's good to have them get some really good choices early. Another thing is they have time on their side. How many of us go back and say, oh, I really wish I'd put money in that retirement account when I was 22 or saved in that Roth when I was 25. Nearly everyone, that's one of the most common things that come up. So the idea is if you get those, and I'm noticing, and Katie can say her experience, I'm seeing the young people being a lot more engaged with a lot of this because they understand the importance of it. And so they're interested in planning, they're interested in these things. And a lot of times they just don't have a good source of guidance, someone that's really helping them. So they, you know, look at things online. It may or may not be relevant to their situation. So I know, and I want to stress that's a big passion of Katie. Katie really, really loves working with younger people because she can see that impact in their lives of these good choices made over long periods of time. So really want to bring that one up. Let's see here. The other one, I can answer, you can answer, Kate. I'll throw it to you first. How does the no taxes on overtime work?
The no taxes on overtime has an income maximum. So that overtime so you know, it's easily in there, but once you've made over a certain income, it's no longer applicable. And I don't remember off top of my head the exact numbers, but it is in the 150,000 income level range when it phases out. And I don't remember if that is a temporary one or not. Do you, Kristina?
Expires in 2028. I have all my notes from the last one.
Awesome. And all the expirations are 28, 29, or 30. They're not the same for things that expire. Workers
earning under 150K, single filers, so obviously can deduct up to $25,000 for tips and overtime pay. It expires in 2028. Katie mentioned that it's important to know that literally some of these things take effect this year immediately. A lot of them do, and some have no expiration date, and others do have various expiration dates. So we can't stress enough, I'm sure everybody's well aware of this, it's going to depend on who the next administration is. So obviously we have midterms coming up, so there's been talk about there's going to be more of these type bills coming out under the Trump administration. Their ability to do this is going to depend largely, I would say, on the midterms and how those play out, unless it gets done before then. But every administration has their own tax plan, and every administration gets different things actually through Congress. Okay, so we'll go back to the Biden administration. They had a pretty audacious tax plan, very different tax plan. Would have had a lot of impact on our clients, and it didn't pass by one vote. The Democrats had the majority, but a one vote stopped it from passing. So there was new versions of it that came out in the Secure Act, et cetera. So it's a moving target. All of these things are a moving target, and almost certainly there'll be changes as the political makeup of Washington changes. So I can't stress enough. That's why planning is important, because Katie said, there's these windows. Okay, we got a window. So this is a time to do this or a time not to do this, because maybe it'll change later. So that's why planning again becomes so important. How can planning change your taxes? Don't you owe based on what you make?
Yes, you owe based on what you make, but you can change potentially how you take that income, depending on how you take your income. If you're a W-2 employee who has no control of their income and you have no taxable investments, then no, you can't change that portion of your taxes. But what you can change is what itemized deductions may roll down to you or not. If your income are things that you do have control over, if you're a business owner, if you're taking distributions from different kinds of accounts, or if you have taxable investments, like Kristina mentioned, how the stocks, bonds, dividends, capital gains can come out and you have some control there, then yeah, tax planning can help you decide, how do I want to take these things? Do I want them in this year versus a different year?
And I'll add on the portfolio side too is also that. So let's say I know a client is going to do a Roth conversion. Okay,
Yeah.
Katie's optimized the strategy. We're going to do this much every year to keep you right in this tax bracket. It's all dialed in. I'm going to want to work on the portfolio side and minimize anything on my end, so we don't get a surprise. That's why I see sometimes people holding portfolios like at mutual fund companies or fund companies. They have a lot of taxes that are uncontrollable, right? They're trading in the fund and you pay the taxes. So we think everything's dialed in. All of a sudden we get the, report from XYZ company out there, investment company, and there's a huge 1099 taxable event, and it blows up everything else. So that's why we want to watch everything. It's all intertwined. It's all intertwined. And planning can also, maybe you had a surprise, maybe you didn't do any planning, and all of a sudden you got a big surprise in a tax year going forward. It's like, okay, I never want this to happen again. So sometimes it's proactive planning. I want to sell my home. I want to understand what this is going to look like, what I should do before or after to minimize the tax impact, especially in high tax states, right? You're not just going to get hit federally, you're going to hit state-wise. And if your home's appreciated a lot, that could be a big impact. So how do you plan in advance? What do you do in advance so that year you can try to create no other taxable events? So if you're living off income in your portfolio or selling stocks, do you sell more in advance of the year you're selling your home? So you have income to live on. There's so many pieces to the puzzle. That's why you want to look at everything comprehensively, because it can help with other decisions that you're making. Okay, Katie, is it better to buy a house for my kids or give them money?
Ooh, that's a wild one. I mean, that's a planning piece. It depends on how old you are and what you want to do with the house in the future. Is it a house that they're going to live in, and what resources you have? So I'd say that is a bigger picture planning question. The other side to the question is, do you mean is it better for you, or do you mean is it better for them? There's a lot of pieces there. Who has the tax benefit, and who has the higher income might be part of that question. So it really depends on your situation. I've seen it be beneficial for families both different directions there, depending on what they're looking to achieve. And the way I run a plan is whoever I'm running the plan for, it's their plan. It is really looked at from the eyes of how do I make sure you're taken care of so that you can live the life you want to live. And that's the most important thing in a plan. I often will say, yeah, your kids, yes, they want to be taken care of, but more than that, they don't want to have to take care of you. So that's kind of the table stakes in planning when we look at it.
Yeah, and understanding that too, because everyone will make a very personal decision there. Not everything that
Absolutely.
people do is based on the most financially expedient decision, right?
Yeah.
There's a life to be lived. There's a family you care for, or friends, or organizations. There's a lot to be said for giving while you're alive and not have everything just
Mhm.
pass on to the organizations or people that you wish to get it upon your life. And there's that balance to making sure you will have enough to meet your needs and also enjoying the beauty of being able to help your children afford a home, to be able to support an organization that you're very passionate about. And that's a balance in planning too. And to get you to that, a lot of times what Katie will say, you can afford to spend this much every year and you have this probability of being successful, including everything, long-term care costs, everything, this product. And some people say, I want this at 99%. And other people say, I'm cool at 80. All right, I want to help the kids, and I know there's a trade-off, or this is the total amount you can spend safely. Okay, and you'll decide whether it's to support the kids or travel the world or go back to school, whatever. We're not telling you how you spend your money. That's a personal choice. We're just saying what the percentage and probabilities of success are in this various modality. But there is that personal choice. I can say for myself personally, I want to make a difference while I'm alive.
Sure.
I'm best I know, unless I'm floating around watching, I'm not going to get to see all those benefits when I pass on. So there's a lot. However, I also don't want someone taking care of me when I'm older, as most of us feel. So that is a balance within that. Okay.
And the other piece to that is that, let's say you strongly want to do something. I really want to help the kids. Well, then we can build the plan and look at various options and see what is the most optimal in your particular situation. And maybe the most optimal is not the way you want to go. Guess what? I'm not in charge. I'm just showing you which way it goes and can help you figure out how to best proceed with however you decide to live your life, because everyone's life is just different, and everyone's values, you can value things in a different way, and that's beautiful. That's part of the point.
Okay, let's see, we got some more questions over here. So I got three sources of them here. So, um, oh, I can even answer this one. Do you have a transparent fee schedule? Do you have a financial minimums for new clients? I can answer that really easily. Yes and yeah, yes and no. So we have a menu of services at Sequoia, and you pick what you value most, and that's what you're going to pay us for. We do not charge for the initial consultation, and we'll probably answer a ton of your questions right there. And the reason for that is it's a great way to meet one another, get to know one another, and see if it's a good fit for all involved. But we charge a flat fee for service, and the fee is based on complexity, and it's all disclosed up front. So there's no surprises, there's no gotchas. And when we manage investments, we generally charge a flat fee for that service as well, though it does depend on what you hire us to do. And all of that's disclosed up front. We do not get paid compensated outside. It is the client paying us for service. So I hope I'm answering that properly. It's pretty darn transparent. And again, we're not working for any XYZ fund company or ABC investment bank. So it is the client for services provided. Final thing I'll say on that is there's no requirement that we manage your investments. If you love managing your investments, if you're happy with the way things are, we can just do planning for you. We're going to tell you what the investments need to do for you to be successful, and we're going to want to monitor the taxes and the performance and things like that, because that's part of your plan. It is an option. In fact, we generally recommend that we do the plan before we do any investment work, because quite frankly, anyone who gives you investment advice without doing planning is selling you a product. How can you know what is the best way to invest your money in the right vehicle and this or that? The world is your oyster. There's so many different ways you can do things. Can't tell you often, Katie and I have said, pay down debt, don't invest. Put your money here. You don't need to invest. Like, why take all that risk and headache? We don't have an agenda or an objective to put you one direction or the next. But until we do some form of planning, we need to know what you need. With the exception of like a situation where sometimes people's financial advisors retire, there's a bad situation, they really want to make a move. We certainly can do things in different orders. But if there's no urgency, let's plan. Then you'll be comfortable with the decisions you make. So I hope that helped with your question. I see your name here, but I don't want to say anybody's names out loud for confidentiality reasons. But if you're interested, like I said, please reach out to us. We'll do a consultation and see if we can be of service to you. What you described sounds like a QCD. So it's about the IRA charitable giving. To send money to Red Cross, for an example, right out of an IRA as an untaxed required minimum withdrawal RMD. Any changes to QCD rules?
No, wonderfully. There are no changes to the QCD rules. And so that's still a really great option depending on, how you want to charitably give, what resources you have, or, what you need for tax purposes. Like we said, for some folks, their charitable giving, it makes more sense to do it from your IRA, which is what a QCD is. It's a qualified charitable distribution. And for other folks, it may make sense to use other resources to reach their charitable goals. One piece that was noted by this questioner was that the qualified charitable distribution can count as your required minimum distribution, or RMD. So starting at some age, and I say that because it depends on what year you were born, some point between 73 and 75, depending on what year you were born, you are required to start taking out a percentage of your non-Roth accounts, IRAs, SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, all of those accounts that you've not yet paid taxes on. A percentage of them has to be distributed and counts as taxable income. A qualified charitable distribution can be a really useful way to reduce your taxable income, because if it goes straight to that charity, such as the Red Cross, it is a charitable gift, but it is not taxable, but it does count as that distribution you have to take. The one big change to qualified charitable distributions, which happened a couple years ago, is actually that you can still do them at 70 and a half. You're not required to start those RMDs until 73 or 75, depending on what year you were born. So there are a few years where you could do the QCD, and it's not an RMD component. It's still a planning consideration and a charitable gifting consideration. And I think QCDs are awesome. What a cool way to gift.
And I'll add to what Katie said, that's where planning comes in.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? It's not uncommon for people to have a substantial amount of money put aside in 401ks and IRAs throughout their lifetime. And oftentimes it's more money than they need. And then you hit that. Fortunately, it was raised the age, because
I mean, that is one of my favorite bill changes in the last number of years. Not only was it raised, but it was made significantly simpler. It used to be the year following the year in which you turned 70 and a half, which is complete nonsense to try to figure out. Now it's like straight line years, and it's based on what year you were born.
Leave it to the politicians and make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yes, for once they made something more simple. I mean, then they changed the years again, but
But the years are important, and there's a reason why, as I'm mentioning, a lot of people have a lot of money saved in these tax deferred accounts, and it's not common for people to continue working in their 70s nowadays. Yeah. For the most part, because people enjoy it, we're also living a lot longer, right? So people want to make sure there's enough money. So the pain is they're required to take these big chunks of money out of their retirement savings in addition to their income and be in higher tax brackets, which means more of that money had to go to pay the government. So it was not a good situation, especially in the higher tax states where it was kind of like a one.
And this is something I look at in planning. I really look at what are your taxes of your lifespan. And for many people, it's like a valley, around retirement, and then it goes up. And that's those required minimum distributions. And that's where within the planning strategies, we look at, should we do Roth conversions? Should you consider QCDs really from a tax strategy? It's fun. I like that stuff.
I'm going to add one little wrinkle. I won't go too far down this path because it's so individualized. One thing that's very important to understand is inherited IRAs, because
that's a different story.
That is very complicated. It keeps changing. It literally, when the previous administration passed new rules on that, it took the IRS months to figure it out. Which puts us in a situation like we have to tell our clients what to do, but we can't because we're waiting for the IRS to give us the guidance.
I think over a year. It was really messy.
It was a long time. And so the reason being is, and I just want to throw this out there, I'm not trying to scare people into planning, but I'm just saying that these are expensive mistakes we've seen made, which is a situation when your spouse passes. IRAs are an individual name, and it is critically important that that IRA gets coded properly. Whether it should be coded as a beneficiary or a spousal really, really depends on your situation, but there can have massive tax impact.
Or rolled into your own. You've got like a couple different options as a spouse.
And it's huge because we don't want you to have to take money before you want to or need to. So that's another important planning thing when there's an inherited IRA, especially a spouse. The planning around this is really, really, really important before you make any changes to it into a different name. I think Katie answered the next one because it was
I
asking
think we did, yeah.
which age you were needing to take the money out. So,
And the percentage, it starts around 3%. I actually haven't double checked that math lately since it's an actuarial table. And so starting it at 75, it's probably a larger number than what it used to be. Starting at 70 and a half, it's probably closer to 4. Starting if your required minimum distribution starts at 75, but it's a percentage that goes up a little bit every year.
yeah, and is it specific, and also depends too on your beneficiary's age.
Yeah.
And the differential, if it's 10 years or less in ages, there's a lot of factors. So that's a really good thing. Wherever your IRA is held, they should be able to give you that information right off the bat. There are some calculations and tables you can use. It's also based off the closing balance on the previous year.
Yep.
So the number will change every year if nothing else changed, because obviously the markets fluctuate. Okay, here's a fun one, Katie. I don't know if you want to answer this one or I have to answer it. It's political, kind of. Are Trump's policies causing inflation? I think this is more of a Kristina question. It's more investment related. And the answer to that is probably more complicated than the remaining time we have today. There's many factors, and we'll take the politic component out of it. There are many factors that create inflation, and inflation is also highly personal. So there's the basic governmental number of the CPI, which is a basket of goods and services. And what is that basket, right? And even that basket, how it's calculated, has changed over time. And there's also what is more relevant to most people than the official CPI number is your personal inflation number. And let's give a quick example of a little bit going back in time here. From the CPI, from the official governmental inflation number, it was very, very low post-financial crisis. But Katie and I can attest, if you had big healthcare bills, or if you're sending your kids to college, your personal inflation was pretty dang high, right? Because the cost of both of those, especially before the Affordable Care Act, the cost of health insurance was rising rapidly. It was very unpredictable, and you may or not be able to get coverage, right? It's uncertain for a lot of people. And the cost of college was skyrocketing. So inflation, if your spending was in these two categories, was very high at a time when nationally inflation was very low. So there's a lot of inputs to it. Talk about a lot of this now. If you're in Northern California, your PG&E bill has doubled in the last 4 years. Okay, so that's an essential cost, right? If you want power and you need to these resources, you have to pay it. So inflation is personal; it's not national. So you look at this. So any administration's policies can increase or decrease inflation. The challenge with inflation in the basic terms is there's a lot of money that's been pumped in the system since the pandemic period. A lot. The money didn't disappear. It's still there, floating around, and that is driving up costs with or without extra potentialities like tariffs and things like that. There's only two solutions really to really minimize inflation. Number one is we just flood the country, we'll use just national here, with goods and services. There's so many people doing so many things that everything just drops in price because of competition, which is unlikely. The secondary thing is something pretty much nobody wants to see, which is a significant economic slowdown or recession. That will bring costs down, right? So these two things will solve for inflation. So government regulations, policy, tariffs, obviously, anything like that can affect inflation. And different administrations will do it in different ways, but there's a lot more of things happening in the economy. Right now, the economy is strong, and that is driving up costs overall. Wages are also going up, right? So right now, for the most part, the public, again, I'm being very generalist here, okay? If you're living on a fixed income, inflation is hitting you a lot harder at the grocery store than if you're earning an income and your wages are rising and they're offsetting the current inflation numbers. It's very different. So inflation, again, highly personal. Planning can help because part of your personal inflation is taxes, is the expense and cost of things. So is there anything you can do? If you can save some money on taxes, that gives you a little more wiggle room to be able to afford rising costs regardless of the cost. So
I imagine that net of taxes, many seniors for the next couple of years will feel their after tax, it flattens that a little because of some of these extra tax benefits to seniors.
And I'll throw out there too, because I have just a few minutes on the economy, so I'm going to talk about things. Inflation and the official number is likely to rise later this year. and then begin to moderate early next year. Here's a beautiful thing about inflation. We'd actually see it in advance pretty well, barring an economic shock, like an unforeseen shock. It's going to rise primarily because the economy is strong and costs are rising, everything. This is independent. So far, we have not really seen on the input costs, we have not seen tariffs having a meaningful impact on the most recent CPI print. It's really not been. Could it increase? Certainly. We don't know. There are a lot of opinions out there. It's unknown. But the biggest driver of these rising costs is just going to be a strong economy and people spending. And this is likely to bump up into early next year and then start to moderate. Now, when I say bump up, we're not going back to the 9% inflation we had in 22, the big spike. We're not going there. We're going in the low fours. So right now we're in the mid twos and low fours. And again, don't use this as a plan. All my stuff's going to go up in cost, because it's going to very much depend. Planning helps. Planning helps. Can you offset this on the investment side? Can you offset this on the tax plan? The financial planning side is really, really, really important. So don't use that as a wholesale, oh my God, nobody really even talked about inflation until that big spike happened in 22. And now it's headline
Even
word.
when that big spike was happening, I had clients really saying, oh, my costs are going up so much. And I would rerun their numbers with them, and I'd show them of their overall outflow. It was a far smaller impact than they realized, because parts of their outflow are very fixed as well. The biggest benefit of owning a home is that your house outflow is pretty flat, and then and a lot of the numbers are really flattened, right? Your mortgage is generally steady. If you still have a mortgage, your property tax are limited by how much they can go up per year, at least here in California, which really tempers the impact of inflation on an actual true budget.
And it's also, what stage are you in? Again, is your income sources fixed, or are your income sources variable? All these things. Katie mentioned property taxes. I'll throw 3 different states out there real quick to show you. And that's an ongoing fixed cost that doesn't go away when you retire, right?
Yep.
You want your home, you gotta pay it. So California Prop 13, property taxes are capped, and the raise is pretty controlled. Now, there are talks about making that go away within the state. So it depends on, the future direction. But right now, I think that's one of those things that's gonna be a hard fight to get rid of, right? People really depend on it. And they'll throw another state out there, Texas. Texas doesn't have a cap on property taxes. So if the police need more money, or the firefighters, or anybody needs more money, it can just be passing your property taxes. That could be a challenge for people on a fixed income when those are unpredictable.
In other states, they reset it to fair market value every year. So depending on how the property rates have changed.
And it depends where the states are getting their income from. And Nevada has dirt cheap property taxes, incredibly low property taxes. Not much changes them because they get the revenue from other sources. So when you're deciding where to live, that's why we say you have to look at the total cost of living there, not just what are my state taxes, something that's very limited. And I guess with the time we have left, I will do a very quick economic update. Katie, you want to hang around for a moment? As I mentioned earlier, the economy is still in growth phase. The markets continue to run up beyond the fundamentals. So expect, okay, we're gonna have this big pullback, and then the fundamentals keep seeming to catch up with the market. So right now, the market is collectively pretty fairly valued. However, with this big run up that we've had since the sell-off in April, expect volatility. We are going to have these really big sell-off days. We're going to have more of this ups and downs as we're digesting through this current phase. That's usually the case when you've had a big market run up. There'll always be an excuse. It'll be a political excuse, or an economic excuse, or a geopolitical excuse, but ultimately this is how the markets work. We just got through the second quarter earnings. We got guidance for the year, and things are looking collectively pretty good. But we also have a lot of very high valuation stocks. It'll be interesting to see what happens to NVIDIA tomorrow after market. But there's also a lot of high valuations. Are these valuations justified, or is it just money being pushed towards the market? There is no recession in the short term. We will have a softer period as all of these new policy changes are being absorbed, but there's not, again, barring a shock, there's not a recession in the near term. In fact, more than likely in 26, we're going to start to see a run up in the economy. There's a lot of causes for that. We can map a lot of these things out. We'll probably start to see inflation begin to moderate and another spurt of growth. One thing to keep in mind, there's some different analysis on this. We don't have the exact amount, but the impact of these tax cuts, at least again, in the short term that they exist, will almost certainly bring an economic boost as more money's in more people's pockets. 2/3 of our economy, you guys have heard me say this 100 times, is consumer spending. But there's likelihood when people see, oh, I do get some benefit from this. So this again transcends politics. This is much more, if people have money to spend, do they? Do they invest it? Do they spend it on their kids? Do they spend on travel? They remodel their homes. That's one thing we've seen in the real estate market, is that people stuck in their home. They're stuck in their home because, gosh darn it, it's gone so much up in value. If I sell it, I'm going to lose so much money to taxes. And I got this sweet mortgage rate and I'm not moving. And my property taxes, I know in California, if you're over 50, you can transfer, or 55, I think you can move them. But there's a lot of things that are keeping people in homes where that usual flow of home, get into the starter home, upgrade, kids leave, downsize, that's kind of gone away for a lot of people. And that in itself is causing a lot of people to spend money on remodeling their homes so they can age in place. Do they need to expand it? Do they need to retrofit it or remodel it? So construction people are booked to the gills still for years now, because more people are choosing to spend money on right sizing or improving their homes. So I bring this up because as this bill passes, yes, it's temporary. Yes, it can change. What will happen to this bill will depend very much on the outcome of future elections. And, again, one thing that's going to be really hard, even if the next election comes up, presidential or midterm, and we have a big shift in the political winds, it's really hard to take things away from people once they get them. Okay, so, I can say that, no taxes on tips and overtime is a great selling point, Social Security, et cetera. It's going to be hard to take those away. So it would be surprising that even if we have a change in administrations, well, we will have in the next presidential cycle, that necessarily these will go away. We just have to plan based on what we know today. Trying to touch all these things. Okay, last one with a bunch of questions. What's the Fed gonna do? Ooh, Kristina's crystal ball. They've said it. They're kind of sticking with what they said at the beginning of the year. Really, nothing's changed. Been a lot of noise around it. There's been a lot of noise from the president. There's been a lot of noise with other people who are saying, hey, you need to cut rates, you stimulate the economy. One thing I'll say is pretty much every president, as long as I've been doing this since the early 90s, has tried to get the Fed to cut rates because they all want the economy to get stimulated. They all do. They all do it. Not usually this vocally, not usually in the fashion that we have with this current administration. So it's been a little bit of a wild ride. Agree with them or disagree with them, Powell's done a great job at just keeping an even keel, keeping the separateness of the Fed, which is critically important, that the Fed remains separate and independent. But his term's up next year, so we'll have a new Fed chair, and we don't know exactly what they're going to be, more hawkish or more dovish, more higher rate, lower rate. But right now, the highest probability is that there'll be at least 2 rate cuts this year, probably one in September and then one maybe later in the year. But it's going to be hard to do more because there's still uncertainty around policy and the impacts on inflation. And because there will be this little rise in inflation, the Fed is going to err towards being cautious. You've heard me talk about this before. The reason is if inflation gets entrenched, it runs away. It's really hard to kill. It's hard to kill the first time. If you saw how aggressive the Fed was in 22, bam, 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 raising rates. The second time around, it's harder, much, much harder. For those of you old enough to remember the early 80s, the inflation was so entrenched and so attached, and then they made so many policy mistakes during the 70s that when the Chairman Volcker got in, Fed Chairman Volcker, he was forced to drive the economy into 2 back-to-back recessions to kill the inflation. Now, after that, we had an amazing boom period of the late 80s on into the 90s, right? It was maybe worth the price, but it was pretty hard during those couple of years. So as you can imagine, that they really want to avoid a repeat of that. And I would imagine the Fed is going to be, they're going to cut. They said they were going to cut. They're likely going to do that, but they're going to be testing. Does this get too much? Do things get a little too frothy? Do people get a little too excited? But it could be helpful potentially towards the real estate and other areas that have slowed down a bit with the higher costs of borrowing. It may be stimulative there. So we'll watch and see. And this is largely priced into the markets at this point. So I don't imagine so many big changes. And I'll keep the other ones for, I guess, for next time. There was something that was really urgent. There is one that would be even a fun one for Katie and I to do in the future, is talking about planning for a kid's college or the cost of college and things. It was a really interesting study that came out recently, which is 40% of people graduate high school, don't have a bachelor's degree, make over $100,000 a year. Now, $100,000 a year doesn't sound like a lot in the Bay Area, but in a lot of the country, that's a pretty good wage. And I'm not saying don't go to college. Gosh darn, it's not important. It is. But the idea of it is the cost of college being in line with the potential future benefit, because it is such an extraordinary investment. And really thinking it through and what makes the most sense. So we can almost have a whole session on those considerations too, and then making those decisions as a family. And balancing out the desire to give your children the very best, or grandchildren, the very best opportunities available to them, at the same time making sure that you're not putting yourself, as Katie mentioned, they're taking care of you story and situation. So I'll leave that for a future one. That being said, we are coming up on time now, and so I thank everyone very, very much for coming. We hope you found this informative and interesting and thought-provoking and stimulating. Please share this with others. We really want to get the word out. We want everyone, whether they hire Sequoia or not, to get good financial guidance and good advice, and just ideas for thoughts and consideration for their own planning. Because as you probably noticed from this, and we only scratched the surface, just a little tiny surface of all of the things to consider when you're doing this. And it is a constantly moving and changing target. And so the idea of just getting you a place to start, some ideas for consideration, was the intention of today's webinar. And we'll continue to do these each month. So anything you want to say, Katie?
No, that's it. But thanks for joining, and yeah, pay attention. If you've got questions, reach out. We would love to chat. We'd love to connect, see where these decisions could make a change in your life.
Our highest intention is to prevent I wish I knew. The wish I knew, at least when it comes to your financial planning. So thank you all very much for listening, and follow up with us if you have any questions, and we'll see you again next month.
See you later.
All right, bye.